It is absolutely critical that we do the fair thing for workers and we do the fair thing for the people that you work with and represent when you're here. You've got the increased super guarantee provisions with no guarantee at the moment that you're going to get some additional funding for that. We've got the gap in the wages between the public and private sector, and this is growing all the time. So I know that people are losing workers, staff from the not-for-profit sector going into either the public sector or the private sector. We've got increasing costs of delivering services, utilities, rent, insurance. We've got the resource boom, and particularly in my home state of Western Australia, that means that workers are going off to work on mining sites. I know of one person in a regional centre who lost a worker, gone up into the mining industry. I know another who works for not-for-profit whose daughter has left school, gone up to work in a mine to clean for $80,000. How can you compete with that, folks? It's particularly a problem for the aged care sector in my state at the moment. Our population is ageing. We have a growing demand for services and a shrinking workforce, not to mention the average age of the workers in the not-for-profit sector. We have a shift to competitive tendering and underfunding of services. We've got an erosion of the value of the fringe benefit tax concessions. We've got a lack of appropriate indexation of funds, growing burden of red tape, and a lack of commitment to adequately deal with the growing burden of red tape. And having one department, for example, and I'll pick on one, and I apologise, FACSIA, that I'm picking on you, but FACSIA says we're going to reduce the burden of red tape. We need a whole of government approach to do that, not just a department by department approach. And by the way, it's not been very effective anyway. Sorry, FACSIA. I'll go back to this issue of advocacy, one that I'm absolutely passionate about. Having come from an NGO for most of my working life, I absolutely appreciate and know what role advocacy has to play or plays in the changing of policy. The not-for-profit sector are the leaders of policy decision making. You're at the cutting edge of it. And without you being at that cutting edge, we won't get the change that we know is needed for our community. Over the last decade or so, there's been a push to move away from advocacy, or certainly to narrow the definition of what activities are considered acceptable for not-for-profits. And there's been a move, as I said earlier, to exclude advocacy. At the same time, the opportunities for engagement in policy development have been, still continue to be ad hoc and not, I don't believe in that, in the meaning of a true partnership to which I was referring earlier. My argument is, as I say, is that the third sector leads the way in policy development, in innovation and community engagement, and that good public process actually reduces the risk of policy failure. How many of you have seen time after time policy implemented or put in place that you know is never going to deliver the outcomes? And if they'd only asked, you could have told them. And when you did tell them, even when you weren't asked, they didn't listen. As I said, as someone who's bridged both worlds, I'm very, very supportive of the role of advocacy and will continue to wherever I'm in the Senate, on those cross benches that the Minister was talking about. If you look at the issues around unfair contracts and the need for reform there, a recent paper from Miles McGregor-Lowndes and Amanda Batney document how departments were abusing their position of power. And let me quote, "Unilaterally impose conditions that would not be tolerated in a commercial market or even in other government service procurement contracts." How many of you have been in those situations? They argue that many of the service contracts that they investigated revealed extensive executive power which, if they were continued in the legislative instruments, governments would have difficulty justifying them to the Parliament and unlikely to see them challenged. The report claims that these contracts represent an erosion of fundamental constitutional principles which is facilitated by the outsourcing of government responsibilities for service delivery through private contracts. This hampers the ability of not-for-profit services to engage in social innovation and deliver the best possible service. and conflicts with the spirit of the compact and the rhetoric of partnership. The paper recommends a model whereby we use a soft power option to restrain departments from abusing this almost unbridled contractual power by enabling legislative scrutiny of standard form contracts. The process would not consider specific contracts or direct specific changes, but would rather enable concerns about standard form contracts to be placed on the public record and require the executive to give a meaningful explanation to Parliament in the response. I think this is something that we should be following up because, as I said, I never want to see the situation again where we have such outrageous provisions in contracts. In conclusion, we need to improve government engagement with the not-for-profit sector, establish a single independent regulatory body for the not-for-profits. We need to improve contractual arrangements with services. We need to improve regulation and reporting, report once, use often. We need to pay properly for the cost of delivering services. Not-for-profits should not be seen as just the cheap way of delivering government obligations. We need to simplify and enhance the taxation environment, and we need to plan for the future in a real partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for canvassing a pretty wide range of issues that are pertinent to the reform of the sector. I was just reflecting as you were talking, and this is, let me say, no reflection just on your presentation, but perhaps everything I've heard this morning, in terms of the number of cliches we actually use with around the topic of reform in our sector, and I'm up to a cliche count now of 4. We've got a perfect storm, one-stop shops, a report once, use often, and reducing burdens of red tape. There are probably many others too. I figure if we could actually trade in cliches, we'd be a very wealthy sector at this point in time. I wonder if you can join me in welcoming our next speaker, the Honourable Kevin Andrews.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion about the role of the not-for-profit sector, a discussion which, as you know, occurs in the light of the research report of the Productivity Commission, Contribution of the Not-for-Profit Sector. Although the Productivity Commission report will be well known to many here, let me briefly reiterate a number of the findings by way of background. Significant amongst the recommendations were the following. First, the establishment of a new National Registrar for community and charitable purpose organisations. Secondly, the pursuit of harmonisation of state and territory-based incorporated associations legislation with more simple reporting requirements and rules. The pursuit of harmonised fundraising legislation, simplified reporting, accounting and related requirements, more clarity about funding obligations and simplified contractual arrangements. As you know, there are some 600,000 not-for-profit organisations in Australia representing a wide diversity of interests, groups and services. The vast majority of them, some 440,000, are small unincorporated entities. Another 136,000 are incorporated associations, about 9,000 incorporated by other means, including 2,500 Indigenous corporations, and about 1,850 are cooperatives. Just 11,700 are companies limited by guarantee. And of the total of 600,000, less than 1/10, about 59,000, are deemed economically significant by the ABS, that is, employed paid staff and or have an active tax base, although this is a narrow measure. Excluding volunteers, the sector made up 4.1% of GDP in 2006-07, a contribution of $43 billion. Almost 320,000 people are employed by the sector, which also attracted very significantly some 4.6 million volunteers. The expansion of the welfare state in the 1970s and the increase in the demand for a range of services over the past 2 decades and the encouraging of outsourcing of services previously delivered by government has resulted in a significant increase in government funding for not-for-profit organisations. While a Productivity Commission report relates primarily to the larger organisations and those in receipt of government funding, a proper consideration of the not-for-profit sector should include the extraordinarily diverse range of services involved.